Please welcome, esteemed audience. Today, we are honored to present a captivating tale that delves into the depths of human emotions, the tear of trust. We invite you to listen closely as we unravel a story of shattered bonds, enduring love, and the arduous journey toward healing. Before we begin, please consider subscribing to our channel. The quiet hum of an American suburban afternoon was abruptly shattered, not by a sudden storm, but a question, innocent in its delivery, yet chilling in its implication. David, a man whose life revolved around the steady rhythm of family and work, sat engrossed in his newspaper, the scent of fresh ink mingling with the distant murmur of lawnmowers. He was the quintessential father, a bulwark of stability for his small family, his world anchored firmly by his wife, Sarah, and their young son, Sam. Then, from Sam's room, the tinny sound of a television program drifted into the living room, followed by the 4-year-old's voice, a small bright beacon that usually brought nothing but joy. "Daddy, what's adultery?" The words hung in the air like a sudden, unexpected chill, freezing David in place. The newspaper, a weighty tome of daily events, slipped from his numbed fingers, landing with a soft thud on the plush carpet. His throat tightened, a sudden unexplainable knot of fear constricting his breath. Where did you hear that, Sam?" he managed to ask, his voice a strained whisper, though he strove for an ordinary tone. Sam, a whirlwind of curious energy, his dark eyes wide and his unruly mop of hair a testament to his playful spirit, stood tentatively at the living room door. His innocent gaze pierced through David's carefully constructed calm, igniting a flicker of profound unease within him. How could his 4-year-old son, a child barely out of toddlerhood, spontaneously utter such a word, plucked from the seemingly innocuous airwaves of a children's program? A terrifying thought, sharp and cold, pierced through the fog of his confusion. Could it be Sarah? The seed of doubt, tiny yet venomous, was planted, beginning its insidious process of germination in David's mind, a subtle shift in the landscape of his unwavering trust. The days that followed felt oddly skewed, as if the world had subtly tilted on its axis. The tiny seed of suspicion, once an unwelcome intruder, began to send out relentless tendrils, wrapping themselves around David's thoughts. He observed Sarah with a new, almost clinical intensity, each everyday action suddenly imbued with a hidden meaning. Her increasingly frequent afternoon outings, always prefaced with "a meeting a friend," began to chafe at his nerves. One particularly crisp afternoon, fate, or perhaps a cruel coincidence, dealt a blow that felt like a physical strike. David, on an impromptu errand, found himself outside a quaint coffee shop, the aroma of roasted beans filling the air. Through the window, he saw her, Sarah, seated across from a man with distinguished graying hair and a warm, open smile. They were laughing, a shared intimacy in their expressions that twisted David's gut into a painful knot. His heart seized, a cold dread washing over him. The sight of Sarah so at ease with a stranger was a stark contrast to the slightly guarded woman he thought he knew. When Sarah returned home that evening, the air between them was thick with unspoken questions. David's voice, though outwardly calm, held an accusatory edge as he confronted her. She stammered, her explanations tangled and unconvincing. "Just an old friend I haven't seen in ages," she offered, her eyes darting away, unable to meet his unwavering gaze. But her very evasion, her palpable discomfort, served only to fuel the fire of David's burgeoning fear, solidifying his worst imaginings. He pictured the man's warm smile, the way Sarah had leaned in conspiratorially, and the pieces, though fragmented, began to coalesce into a chilling tableau of betrayal. That night, the quiet of their home was shattered once more, this time by the shrill insistence of Sarah's phone. David, still reeling from the afternoon's encounter, was in the kitchen when he overheard the hushed conversation. His breath hitched as he caught Sarah's final words, delivered in a voice laced with a desperate urgency he'd never heard before. "Don't bother me anymore. This has nothing to do with him." The identity of the caller remained a phantom, an unknown tormentor. Yet the raw panic in Sarah's voice, coupled with the ambiguous him, ignited a furious inferno in David's mind, pushing him further into the abyss of suspicion. His imagination, already running wild, painted vivid, horrifying scenarios. He felt like a detective stumbling upon a crucial piece of evidence, even if he couldn't yet decipher its full meaning. The next morning dawned, cold and bleak, mirroring the landscape of David's soul. The quiet hum of the house, usually a source of comfort, now felt like a shroud of silence, heavy with unspoken truths. Driven by a desperate need for answers, he accessed their joint bank statement. His eyes, burning with a frantic intensity, fixated on a single entry, a large transfer, several $1,000s, destined for Daniel Miller. The name echoed in his mind, precise and chillingly familiar. It was the very name of the man he'd seen Sarah with at the coffee shop. A tidal wave of white-hot rage, raw and unrestrained, surged through him, eclipsing all reason. "What is this, Sarah?" David roared, his voice a primal bellow, the bank statement trembling in his hand like an indictment. He thrust the paper before her, its stark black print a damning testament. Sarah's face drained of color, turning a ghastly white, as if all the blood had suddenly receded. She opened her mouth to speak, a desperate explanation forming on her lips, but the words caught in her throat, strangled by an unseen force. Her silence, profound and damning, coupled with the undeniable guilt etched across her face, was the final, devastating proof David needed. It was an unspoken confession, heavier and more conclusive than any spoken word. "I can't believe you, Sarah. This is over between us," David screamed, his voice hoarse with pain and fury, the words tearing through the fragile fabric of their shared life. He spun on his heel, abandoning her to her fate, the abruptness of his departure leaving a gaping wound in the air. The sharp, shattering sound of a ceramic mug hitting the kitchen floor echoed through the house, a brittle punctuation mark to their broken vows. Sam, who had been innocently playing with his toy cars in the living room, jolted at the sudden violence of the sound. He rushed out, his small worried face crumpling at the sight. His mother, Sarah, was hunched over, her shoulders shaking with convulsive sobs, a tidal wave of grief engulfing her. Her father, David, stood rigidly, his face a mask of scarlet fury, his fists clenched at his sides. "Mommy, are you crying again?" Sam whispered, his voice tiny and fragile, the fear stark and unconcealed in his wide, innocent eyes. David looked at his son, a sharp, agonizing pang tearing through his heart, a momentary crack in his armor of rage. But the bitterness, the deep-seated anger had already eclipsed everything else, a blinding fog that obscured the raw pain in his son's eyes. He turned and walked out, into the unforgiving night, leaving Sarah and Sam adrift in the wreckage of their broken marriage, a family fractured beyond repair. The silence he left behind was louder than any scream, a testament to the irreversible rupture that had just occurred. 3 years had withered on the vine since David's sudden, echoing departure, leaving behind a silence that was less about peace and more about absence. Sam, now a lanky 7-year-old, navigated the once vibrant home as if it were a sprawling, haunted mansion, its rooms echoing with the ghosts of laughter and the spectral warmth of a family unit that had dissolved like sugar in water. The air, once thick with the easy cadence of domestic life, was now permeated by a pervasive anxiety, a faint, metallic tang of worry that clung to the furniture and whispered from the corners of every room. Sarah, a single mother now, bore the weight of their existence with a weary stoicism that masked a constant, gnawing desperation. Her old leather wallet, a relic from happier times, seemed perpetually to mimic her hopes, thin, empty, and frayed at the edges. Sam knew the sound of quiet tears. He knew the almost imperceptible catch in his mother's breath, the way her shoulders would subtly slump, the telltale shimmer in her eyes, even when she tried to pretend nothing was wrong. He often found himself a silent observer, a small, shadowed sentinel in the doorway of the kitchen, his tiny heart clenching with a pain that was too big for his 7 years. The familiar, wrenching sobs would find their way to him, muffled but unmistakable. His mother, Sarah, would be hunched over the kitchen table, a chaotic blizzard of bills spread before her like an insurmountable mountain range, her slender shoulders trembling uncontrollably. This tableau had become entrenched in the very fabric of his young memory, a recurring nightmare in daylight. He learned the silent language of her struggles, the hurried way she'd disconnect a call when he entered the room, the almost imperceptible tightening around her eyes when he expressed a desire for a new toy, always followed by the same softly spoken yet devastating phrase, "We don't have enough money, honey." This was the ache he understood, a hollow, persistent pang of scarcity that resonated deep within his own small being. One such afternoon, unable to bear the silent suffering any longer, Sam padded softly towards her. "Mommy, are you crying again?" he whispered, his voice a tentative, fragile probe into her sorrow. Sarah started, as if awakened from a painful trance, her hand flying to her face to hastily wipe away the glistening tracks on her cheeks. "It's nothing, my love. Mommy's just a little tired," she murmured, her voice thick with unshed tears, a flimsy curtain drawn over a hurricane of emotion. But Sam saw. He always saw. He felt the suffocating sadness that clung to her like a second skin, a dark current that pulled at her heart. He saw the subtle tremor in her hands as she gathered the bills, the way her gaze lingered on the figures as if they were symbols of a cruel, personal failure. Then a thought, born of pure, desperate love and a child's simplistic logic, burst forth from him, raw and unbidden. "If I had money, could I buy Daddy back?" The innocent question, a shimmering shard of glass, cut through the heavy air, lodging itself directly into Sarah's already fractured heart. It was a question that laid bare the profound, unspoken yearning of a child who believed love and family were commodities that could be bought, if only one had the means.
The question, so pure in its delivery, yet so devastating in its implications, became the catalyst for Sam's nascent crusade. A fierce, unwavering determination ignited in his young eyes. He would help his mother. He would buy back their lost happiness, perhaps even buy back his father, if such a thing were possible. With the unwavering conviction of a child convinced of his own capacity for change, Sam embarked on his own desperate quest for money, his methods as simple and earnest as his heart. He began by trying to monetize his budding artistic talents, setting up a makeshift gallery of his colorful, often abstract scribbles outside their house. A cardboard sign, painstakingly lettered, declared, "Art for sale, $1." Passers-by, their faces a mixture of pity and amusement, offered sympathetic smiles. A few kind-hearted souls, touched by the earnestness in his eyes, bought a drawing or two, but no one, not truly, saw the desperate hope clinging to each crown stroke. His artistic endeavors, while endearing, yielded little more than loose change. Undeterred, he moved on to his next venture, car washing. Armed with a hose that felt disproportionately heavy in his small hands and a bucket filled with too much soap, he valiantly tackled his neighbors' vehicles. The results, however, were less than stellar. He'd end up drenched, his clothes plastered to his tiny frame, and the cars, rather than gleaming, would be covered in an uneven, bubbly film. Laughter, gentle and patronizing, followed his attempts. Still, the image of his mother's tear-stained face spurred him on. Finally, he turned to the forgotten discards of the world, empty soda cans. He imagined them as tiny treasure chests, each one holding the promise of a brighter future. He would roam the neighborhood, his eyes peeled for glinting aluminum, his small bag growing heavier with each discovery. One afternoon, bursting with triumph, he returned home, dragging a bulging sack of dirty, crushed cans. His face, smudged with grime but alight with hope, beamed as he presented his bounty to his mother. "I want to work too, so you don't cry every time you open your wallet," Sam declared, his voice filled with an almost painful earnestness, his eyes shining with the pure, unadulterated belief that he held the key to her sorrow. Sarah's gaze fell upon the mud-stained empty cans, then traveled to her son's small, dirt-caked hands, and a fresh wave of tears, hot and bitter, welled in her eyes. It wasn't joy that brought them forth, nor was it simple emotion. It was a searing pain, an almost unbearable ache at the sight of her 4-year-old son, her precious child, carrying the crushing weight of worries that had no business touching his innocent childhood. She knelt, pulling him into a fierce, desperate embrace, her own tears mingling with the grime on his cheek. "My love, you don't need to do these things. Mommy is fine," she choked out, her voice ragged with sobs, a hollow reassurance that even she knew rang false. But Sam didn't understand. All he saw was his mother crying again, and a crushing sense of failure, sharp and sudden, pierced his young heart. He had tried so hard. He had wanted to help. Why did his efforts only bring more tears? "Where is your heart, Mommy? Why do you cry all the time?" Sam asked, his voice laced with the raw sting of hurt, his innocent eyes filled with a confusion that was agonizing to witness. His words, a child's unfiltered cry of distress, were a direct hit to Sarah's already fragile spirit. She had promised herself she would shield him from the harsh realities of their lives, but his simple question tore through her defenses, exposing the raw wound of her own sorrow and the impossible burden she carried.
As Sam continued his earnest, if somewhat ineffectual attempts to wash a neighbor's car, a strange sensation prickled the back of his neck. He felt watched, an unsettling awareness of unseen eyes upon him. A sleek black car, its tinted windows mirroring the sky, glided past slowly, its engine a low growl, sending an inexplicable shiver down Sam's spine. It felt ominous, a dark shadow lingering at the edges of their sun-drenched street. Simultaneously, Sarah's phone vibrated with the harsh summons of an unknown number. A text message, stark and chilling, appeared on the screen. "You think you can get away with this so easily, Sarah? Traitors always pay their price." The words were an icy grip around her heart, the sender anonymous, a ghost from a past she desperately tried to bury. It ripped open old wounds, resurrecting the terrifying memory of David, her ex-husband, and the chilling possibility that he, or someone else, had uncovered a dark secret she had fought so fiercely to keep hidden. The message was a stark reminder that even in her solitude, she was not truly free. In the depths of her despair, a lifeline appeared from an unexpected quarter. Mrs. Helen, a woman of comfortable middle age with kind eyes and a reassuring presence, a fellow parent from Sam's school, unexpectedly paid Sarah a visit. Mrs. Helen, known for her involvement in community affairs, expressed genuine concern for Sarah and Sam's obvious struggles. Her words were gentle and her offer almost too good to be true. A part-time job at her bakery. A faint spark of hope flickered within Sarah, a fragile flame against the encroaching darkness. Yet a subtle unease accompanied this sudden benevolence. The offer, while desperately needed, felt almost too convenient, too perfectly timed. Sarah, in her desperate state, couldn't have known the intricate, sinister web being woven around her. Mrs. Helen,
beneath her veneer of kindly concern, was in fact the sister of a notorious loan shark, a shadowy figure to whom Daniel Miller, Sam's biological father, owed a substantial, life-threatening debt. Mrs. Helen had been dispatched, a seemingly benevolent wolf in sheep's clothing, tasked with observing and befriending Sarah, gradually tightening the screws of pressure, an unwitting pawn in a dangerous game of debt collection. The bakery job was merely a carefully crafted snare, designed to pull Sarah deeper into a world she never knew existed, a world of desperation, threats, and hidden agendas. The seemingly random phone calls, the ominous black car, and Mrs. Helen's sudden appearance were not isolated incidents, but threads in a tightening net drawing Sarah towards a revelation that would shatter the already fragile peace of her existence.
The park, usually a sanctuary of childish abandon, felt different that afternoon. Sam, engrossed in a vibrant crayon masterpiece on a bench, barely registered the rustle of leaves as a figure approached. He was sketching a dragon, a fantastical creature breathing fire, a stark contrast to the quiet melancholia that had settled over his world. The sunlight, usually a playful companion, seemed to cast long, wary shadows. A man, with hair streaked with silver and eyes that held an unspoken sorrow, paused near him. He wasn't old, not truly, but the lines etched around his eyes spoke of burdens carried. He observed Sam for a long moment, a strange, almost possessive intensity in his gaze, before his voice, soft but resonant, broke the afternoon quiet. "You're Sarah's son, aren't you?" Sam, startled but not afraid, looked up from his drawing, the dragon momentarily forgotten. He nodded, his small head tilting inquisitively. The man then introduced himself as David. A strange ripple of unease, cold and unfamiliar, spread through Sam. This man, a stranger, spoke his mother's name with an intimacy that felt out of place. He seemed to know so much about her, details that no casual acquaintance would possess, yet his mother had never once mentioned him. It was as if he'd materialized from a forgotten dream, a figure from a past Sam couldn't recall. When Sam later recounted the encounter to Sarah, her face, already pale from the relentless grind of single motherhood, drained of all color, becoming a canvas of stark white. She dismissed it quickly, too quickly, with a hurried wave of her hand. "Just an old acquaintance, honey. I haven't seen him in ages." But the tremor in her voice, the frantic dart of her eyes, and the almost imperceptible clenching of her jaw spoke volumes to Sam. He saw the raw fear in her gaze, a deep-seated anxiety that mirrored the unsettling messages she'd been receiving. He knew, with a child's intuitive certainty, that this old acquaintance was anything but. The air around Sarah seemed to thicken with unspoken dread, a shadow lengthening from her past. In the days that followed, the man who called himself David, Sam's biological father, became an increasingly unwelcome fixture in their lives. His presence was a dark cloud, casting an ominous pall over Sarah's fragile sense of peace. He wasn't merely observing Sam from a distance anymore. He actively sought out Sarah, his demands escalating from a vague presence to brazen, insistent pleas for money. He would appear at unexpected moments, outside the bakery where Sarah now toiled, near Sam's school, even once lingering near their apartment building. Each encounter was a chisel, chipping away at Sarah's already thin facade of composure. "Sarah, I need money. I owe these people, these gangsters," he'd plead, his voice a low, desperate rasp, his eyes darting nervously as if anticipating an unseen threat. He'd press her against walls, both literal and metaphorical, his desperation a suffocating blanket. Sarah felt a sickening lurch in her stomach as the grim realization dawned.
This David, the father Sam knew only from a fleeting childhood memory, was the same man, still trapped in the destructive current of his past, his gambling addiction a ravenous beast that consumed everything in its path. And now he was trying to exploit her, to drag her back into the mire he himself had created. The mere mention of Daniel's daughter, a child Sarah barely knew, was a cruel twist of the knife designed to play on her innate compassion, a silent threat veiled in a plea. Sarah's past, like a predator, was now stalking her present, its shadow growing longer and more menacing with each passing day.
The sky wept that afternoon, a steady, relentless downpour mirroring the turmoil in Sarah's soul. She had arranged to meet Daniel Miller, Jessica's brother, in a secluded corner of the park, beneath the sprawling canopy of an ancient oak, its gnarled branches offering little solace from the elements. Daniel's face was a mask of sheer panic, his usual stoicism replaced by a wild-eyed desperation. He was arguing heatedly with Sarah, his voice low but sharp with an almost frantic edge. "Sarah, I need more. If not, the child will—" His words choked, dissolving into a desperate cough, unable to voice the unspoken threat that loomed over his daughter. Sarah, her face pale and drawn, spoke in a voice devoid of hope, her words raw with a profound weariness. "I have nothing left to give you. You've already ruined my life and my son's life." Her voice was a fragile whisper against the drumming rain, a lament for all that had been lost. Just as the last, agonizing words left her lips, a figure emerged from the rain-swept gloom, a ghost from a past she believed buried. It was David, her ex-husband, his face a storm cloud of thunderous anger. He had been tailing Sarah for days, a corrosive blend of jealousy and suspicion festering within him since he'd received that anonymous, insidious text message hinting at her double life. He saw her now, locked in a heated argument with Daniel, the very man he'd seen her with years ago, the catalyst for their divorce. Fragments of their desperate conversation drifted to him on the wind, whispers of son and money, words that, in his distorted perception, wove a tapestry of renewed betrayal. David, consumed by a volcanic rage, strode forward, his footsteps heavy on the sodden earth. "What the hell is this, Sarah?" he roared, his voice laced with venom, his eyes burning with contempt as he glared at Daniel. The sheer, unbridled fury in his gaze was a terrifying sight. Daniel Miller, already on the precipice of panic, his mind reeling from the immediate threat to his daughter, saw Sam standing nearby, a small, bewildered figure watching the unfolding drama. In a sudden, desperate reflex, a need for comfort or perhaps a shield from David's wrath, he impulsively pulled Sam into a tight embrace. It was an act born of sheer disorientation, a desperate lunge for something stable in a world that was rapidly unraveling. David, her ex-husband, witnessed this fleeting, desperate hug. The image, innocent in its true context, but monstrous in his distorted perception, slammed into him with the force of a physical blow. His existing doubts, already poisoned by the anonymous messages and his own insecurities, transformed into absolute, unshakable certainty. He hadn't heard the full, desperate context of Sarah and Daniel's conversation, only the damning fragments. The image of Daniel holding Sam, combined with the words son and money, solidified his distorted belief in a paternal bond between Daniel and his child. It was the ultimate betrayal, a knife plunged deeper into an already festering wound. Sarah stood frozen, a statue carved from despair, unable to utter a single word of explanation, trapped in the crosshairs of a monstrous misunderstanding. The rain continued to fall, a cold, indifferent curtain descending upon their shared tragedy, washing away any hope of immediate clarity. The scene, raw and emotionally charged, ended with David's heart hardening further, sealing off any possibility of understanding or reconciliation.
The tension in the air was a palpable, suffocating force, a storm gathering within the sterile confines of the law office. David, her ex-husband, sat rigidly across from Sarah, his face a grim mask of certainty, his gaze burning with the conviction of a man wronged. His suspicion had hardened into an unyielding belief in Sarah's duplicity, bolstered by the distorted tableau he'd witnessed in the rain. He had demanded this confrontation, a three-way reckoning: Sarah, Daniel Miller, and himself. Sam, a silent, fragile observer, sat beside his mother, his small hand instinctively clutching her skirt, his innocent eyes wide with an unspoken fear that mirrored the turbulent emotions swirling around him. The cold, impersonal furniture, the hushed whispers of the legal world only amplified the raw, exposed emotions in the room. Sarah, her voice a fragile whisper against the heavy silence, began to weave that intricate tapestry of truth, each thread painstakingly pulled from the tangled skein of her past. "Daniel Miller," she began, her voice trembling yet firming with a desperate resolve, "is the brother of Jessica, my dearest friend, who passed away 3 years ago." Her eyes, rimmed with the exhaustion of years of hidden burdens, flickered briefly to Daniel, a silent acknowledgement of their shared sorrow. "Jessica made me a promise that I would help her brother if anything ever happened to her. It was a dying wish, a sacred vow I couldn't break." The weight of that promise, a silent, unseen shackle, had dictated her choices, forced her into a life of clandestine meetings and agonizing decisions. "Daniel's daughter," she explained, her voice barely audible, "is gravely ill. She needs urgent surgery, a life-saving procedure that costs more than we could ever imagine." She paused, taking a shaky breath, the full weight of her confession settling over the room. The money David saw that transferred to Daniel Miller, that was for her, to save that little girl. The words hung in the air, suspended between accusation and desperate plea. Her gaze then shifted, slowly, agonizingly, to the other David in the room, Sam's biological father. His presence, an unwelcome phantom from a painful past, seemed to darken the air around him. His very being exuded an aura of desperation and self-interest. "And the David Sam met in the park," Sarah continued, her voice heavy with a weary resignation, "is Sam's biological father. He's been lost to a gambling addiction for years. He abandoned us long ago." A bitter irony clung to the name. The two Davids, one a symbol of shattered trust, the other of broken promises. "He only reappeared because of his debts," she concluded, her voice barely a whisper, "and he was trying to extort money from me." The revelation hung in the air, a stark, painful truth that redefined the landscape of David's, her ex-husband's, certainty. Daniel Miller, his face a canvas of exhaustion and guilt, corroborated Sarah's agonizing confession. He spoke of the dark spiral he had descended into after his sister Jessica's death, how grief and despair had twisted into the insidious grip of a gambling addiction. His voice, hoarse with shame, described the agonizing reality of his daughter's worsening condition, a life teetering on the brink. He confessed to borrowing from dangerous, shadowy figures, loan sharks whose demands grew more terrifying with each passing day. "They're threatening my daughter's life now if I don't pay up," he admitted, his voice cracking with raw fear, revealing the true stakes of his desperation. "Sarah was the only one who helped me out of her promise to Jessica," he finished, his gaze meeting hers, a silent apology in his eyes. Sarah and Daniel's joint confession struck David, her ex-husband, like a physical blow, 1,000 shards of shattered understanding piercing his heart. The intricate web of deceit he had spun in his mind, the edifice of his certainty, crumbled around him. He stared dumbfounded at Sarah, then at Daniel, the truth unfolding before him with agonizing clarity. Their relationship wasn't a clandestine affair, but a desperate pact forged in the crucible of a dying promise and the raw agony of a child's illness. The love he had twisted into betrayal was, in fact, the crushing weight of a burden Sarah had carried alone,
a secret sacrifice. The shame, hot and visceral, flooded through him, a stark contrast to the cold certainty that had fueled his anger for so long. He had been so terribly, utterly wrong. But the biggest shock, a truth that ripped through the very fabric of his preconceived notions, came when Sarah, her eyes brimming with fresh tears, turned to him, her voice thick with a mixture of pain and a fragile, newfound honesty. And David, Sam's biological father, he's the one who left me all those years ago. He's not Sam's father, not in the way you thought. The words, simple yet profound, detonated in David's mind, dissolving the last vestiges of his misplaced jealousy. The David he had envisioned as his replacement, the man he believed had usurped his role, was a broken figure from Sarah's distant past. A man who had chosen abandonment over responsibility. The image of Daniel embracing Sam, which had cemented David's erroneous belief, now twisted into a cruel irony, a symbol of his colossal misunderstanding. As Daniel continued to explain the spiraling depths of his debt, his phone buzzed with an incoming call. The screen, visible to David's peripheral vision, flashed a name that sent a fresh jolt of alarm through him. Casino Royale. Below it, a chilling message. Overdue, game over. David's breath hitched. It wasn't just his daughter's illness. Daniel was still gambling. The bitter, undeniable truth of Daniel's continued deception, a stark betrayal of Sarah's unwavering trust, unfurled before them. He wasn't entirely reliable. He had, in fact, been deceiving Sarah all along, taking advantage of her kindness and her sacred promise. A fresh wave of anger, cold and sharp, washed over David, but it was quickly eclipsed by a gnawing sense of complicity. He had been pulled into this dangerous, convoluted mess, a hopeless bystander now inextricably linked to Daniel's perilous game. At the precise, devastating moment, David's own phone shrieked, an insistent summons that cut through the already strained atmosphere. It was an anonymous video message. He fumbled with the device, his hands suddenly clumsy, his heart hammering against his ribs. The video, cranny and unsettling, showed Daniel Miller being brutally beaten by a group of shadowy, menacing figures. The sickening thuds of the blows, the guttural cries of pain filled the air. And then a terse, chilling message flashed across the screen. You're next if your friend doesn't pay up. David's face went ashen, the color draining from his cheeks, leaving him looking like a ghost. He felt a cold dread seep into his bones, an icy finger tracing a path down his spine. He hadn't realized, he hadn't truly grasped the terrifying depths of Sarah and Daniel's predicament, how their tragedy had, without his knowledge, entangled him in a perilous web of danger. The anonymous threats, the desperate pleas, the hidden debts, it all coalesced into a horrifying tapestry of fear and desperation. He understood now. Sarah's tears, those endless silent rivers he had so cruelly misinterpreted as signs of betrayal, were in fact the overflowing wellspring of a heart that had carried too many burdens, too many secrets, and too many crushing weights for too long. Sam, a silent, traumatized witness to the raw anguish of his mother and the stunned horror on David's face, stood frozen, his small, fragile voice echoing in the sudden, ringing silence of the room. "Where is your heart, Mommy? Why do you cry all the time?" he asked again. The innocent question now imbued with an agonizing new layer of fear. A child's desperate plea for understanding in a world that had suddenly become a terrifying, incomprehensible place. The truth, raw and unforgiving, had finally laid bare the depths of their shared pain, leaving nothing but shattered fragments in its wake.
The truth, raw and unforgiving, had been laid bare, exposing not only the colossal misunderstanding that had fractured their lives, but also the dangerous currents that had silently pulled them under. David, the ex-husband, stood utterly shattered, the pieces of his anger and conviction scattered like broken glass. The full, horrifying extent of his misjudgment crashed over him, a tidal wave of remorse that left him breathless. He saw now how his jealousy, his profound lack of trust, had not merely ended their marriage, but had condemned Sarah and Sam to years of solitary hardship, a desolate landscape he himself had created. The revelation of Daniel Miller's true circumstances and the perilous world of death that had ensnared them all left him reeling. He understood with a chilling clarity that the reappearance of Daniel, Sam's biological father, had served only to heap more impossible burdens onto Sarah's already stooped shoulders. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. I'm so sorry, Sam," David whispered, his voice cracking, raw with a grief that had nothing to do with betrayal and everything to do with profound regret. His apology was not merely for his devastating lack of faith. It was a desperate plea for forgiveness, for abandoning them, for retreating into his own pain during their darkest years. The words, simple yet burdened with the weight of years, hung heavy in the air, a fragile bridge seeking to span an abyss of separation. Sarah looked at David. Her eyes, once mirrors of resentment, now reflected a weary understanding, a deep-seated exhaustion that had finally found a moment of reprieve. The sharp edges of her bitterness had been softened by the sheer magnitude of the revealed truths. She also recognized her own part in the complex tapestry of their suffering. The secrets she had held, even with the purest of intentions, had, paradoxically, woven a stronger, more tangled knot of despair. Her silence, meant to protect, had only served to amplify the misunderstanding. As they began the daunting task of untangling Daniel's monstrous debt, a new revelation, a shadow from David's own past, slipped into the fragile light of their shared vulnerability. "I understand what it feels like to be caught in that kind of spiral, Sarah," David admitted, his voice laced with a bitter irony that twisted his lips. He spoke of his younger, more naive self, of a colossal investment lost due to inexperience and the intoxicating allure of quick profits. Early in their marriage, "I borrowed everywhere I could, desperate to cover it up, to fix it alone, to hide it from you," he confessed, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "The fear of failure, of disappointing you, it made me hyper-vigilant, quick to suspicion, reckless in my judgment." Sarah listened, stunned. This was a secret David had carried, a hidden weight that had molded his character, shaping the man he had become. This raw, unexpected confession not only illuminated the roots of his past impulsiveness and his profound lack of trust, but also offered Sarah a glimpse into the silent pressures he too had endured. It was a shared wound, a broken mirror reflecting fragments of their separate pains, deepening the nascent understanding between them. The past, once a wall between them, now offered a strange, painful bridge. Together, David, her ex-husband, Sarah, and Daniel Miller, united by a desperate common cause, confronted the labyrinthine world of the loan sharks. It was a treacherous battle, fraught with unseen dangers and relentless pressure. But they moved forward as a unit, driven by the unwavering desire to protect Sam and to reclaim a semblance of their own shattered lives. David, in a profound act of penance and understanding, sold a portion of his assets, a substantial sum that acted as a lifeline for Daniel, offering him a chance to repay the predatory debt. It was an act of profound atonement, not just for his past misjudgment, but also a recognition of Daniel's own despair, a silent acknowledgement of the fragility of human choices.
Daniel Miller, humbled and broken, accepted the help, not as charity, but as a chance at redemption. He committed to a rigorous program to overcome his gambling addiction, a painstaking journey toward sobriety, and vowed to rebuild his life, promising never again to cast a shadow over Sarah and Sam's fragile peace. The dangerous web, once so tightly woven, began to unravel. thread by painful thread. Sam, the 7-year-old at the heart of this complex human drama, finally began to understand. The simplistic world of his childhood, where fathers left and mothers cried, expanded to encompass the nuanced, often painful truths of adult lives. He understood that his daddy David, the one who had left, had done so out of a colossal misunderstanding, blinded by his own pain and insecurity. And his other daddy David, his biological father, was also a man grappling with his own demons, his own brokenness. He learned that love and family were not tangible commodities that could be bought or sold, not simple definitions found in children's books, but intricate, ever-evolving journeys of shared experiences, profound understanding, and most importantly, enduring forgiveness. He saw now that his mother's tears, once a solitary river of pain, had transformed. They were no longer tears of isolated despair, but tears of release, of catharsis, of the quiet comfort that comes with burdens finally laid down. The lightness in her eyes, the gentle curve of her lips, spoke volumes of a spirit slowly, tentatively healing. Their family, once shattered, did not magically reassemble into a traditional whole, but they forged a new, unconventional bond, a tapestry woven from the threads of shared hardship and newfound understanding. David, the ex-husband, and Sarah did not rekindle their romance, but they established a profound, respectful friendship, a co-parenting partnership built on deep empathy and mutual support. They navigated Sam's upbringing together, no longer bound by resentment, but by a shared love for their son. David, Sam's biological father, continued his arduous path to recovery, slowly, tentatively rebuilding a relationship with his son, a long and challenging journey marked by small victories and inevitable setbacks. Sarah, standing tall and resilient, learned the most profound lesson of all: to forgive. She forgave both men in her life, recognizing their flaws and their struggles, understanding that even in their brokenness, they were, in their own ways, seeking solace and redemption. And most importantly, she forgave herself. She realized that her heart was not lost, as Sam had so innocently asked, but had merely been burdened, weighed down by too much pain, too many secrets, and the crushing weight of unspoken truths. Now, with the heavy chains of those burdens finally shed, she could finally live a life of authenticity, a life unburdened by shadows. Sam, looking at his mother, saw not just a woman who had once cried endlessly, but a woman whose eyes now held a quiet strength, a resilient hope. He finally understood that family was not a fixed concept, a perfect picture, but a dynamic, ever-evolving journey of love, of understanding, and of profound forgiveness. A journey where each person, even in their brokenness, could find their way back to themselves and to the hearts of those they cherished. The tear of trust, once a symbol of betrayal, had become a testament to the power of truth and the enduring strength of the human spirit. Dear listeners, as our story of the tear of trust concludes, we hope it has resonated deeply within your hearts. This tale reminds us that true understanding often lies beyond what we perceive, that forgiveness is a powerful balm, and that even from the ashes of heartbreak, new forms of love and family can emerge. Please share your thoughts and lessons learned in the comments below. Hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and share this story with others who might find solace or inspiration within its pages. Thank you for listening.